welcome to the Brickin podcast. That is an over-enthusiastic intro, but welcome to the Brickin podcast, partnered with the Goodwin Development Trust. I am Hull comedian Jed Salisbury. We're going to dive into the history of Hull and Henry VIII today. I am currently joined by
Pete Connelly, archaeology manager with Humberfield Archaeology.
Wow, a man whose life is in ruins.
Quite literally in ruins. If it's old and it's been fallen and taken apart, then I'm interested in it.
Excellent, man. Well, let's find out more about yourself. How did you get involved into history? How did that become your...
Well, like a lot of archaeologists, I mean, growing up in the 80s, it's always going to come back to Indiana Jones. I mean, why is it not going to?
That would explain the hat and the whip you do have.
Yeah. The less we talk about that, the better. History's all around us, archaeology all around us. I was lucky I had a mum and dad that, took the family to castles and other places of historic interest. But just at that right moment when you're a 12-year-old and those Indiana Jones movies come out and just capture their imagination. And, they're brilliant movies, but just that essence of just history sitting in there and a little bit of archaeology, for a 12-year-old, and you're thinking, wow, that's brilliant. And that kind of then sort of set me adrift on a voyage of discovery into kind of our history, our archaeology, and, all things old.
Right, excellent, man. And so how often are you finding hidden treasures and fighting Nazis?
Well, luckily, the Nazi thing has worn off a bit, and the treasure thing, you just can't get the insurance nowadays. Your insurers are expecting you'll cover off your face melting off, being done in by aliens from another planet. You just can't get the insurance off. Stay that kind of work now.
For myself, I wouldn't say I'm a historian, but for some reason I've hit my 30s and I've just become ravaged with wanting to know more about the world and just knowledge from dinosaur sharks to history. So I'm very excited to sort of delve into this and get talking to you. So we're here at the South Blockhouse. Do you want to give a quick brief history of that? And we'll dive into that in later podcasts, but we'll start with a brief history.
Yeah. So we're just sitting right on the edge of the South Blockhouse, a fortification that was built under the command of Henry VIII about 480 years ago. It's crazy because it's a site that completely disappears out of history at the end of the 19th century. But the military strategic importance of Hull is something that plays a really strong part in the history of Britain all the way up until the 20th century. So you've got this nationally important monument on your doorstep, but just buried about 70 centimetres below the surface.
It wasn't something I was even aware of until obviously signing on to do this podcast. And then you read about the history and you're like, wow, Hull was super important.
Yeah, it's super important. I would still claim it's super important today, says the Scotsman. But, you look at this sort of the place and its situation on the River Hull, its situation on the Humber estuary, and you just think, wow, this is a city that traded with the whole of continental Europe. You get all these funky people from all across Europe and elsewhere coming here to trade here. But any king worth his royal blood knows that you're going to have to keep control of it, and to keep controlling it, certainly in the times of the Tudor period and the reign of Henry VIII, you're going to need some kind of fortification.
I think even now I like that about Hull. It's got a bit of a rebel streak about it. Everyone says Hull's pretty much its own city, and I kind of like to believe that.
I think so as well. I think maybe it's because it's a city towards the edge of the country. Yeah. You've got to come here. It's isolated a little bit from the rest of the network of the UK.
No one's just passing through Hull. You're here on a mission.
Yeah, you're here on a mission, which allows it to have its own character. But I think the big thing is, and we kind of miss it today, we can look out the window and look at the A63 flyover across the river. But this is a city that looks out to the North Sea. It's a dead end now. I don't want to kind of say, it's a dead end, but let's face it, in some ways it is. Maybe that's the archaeologist speaking, since we're always so interested in the dead. But it's always traded with Northern Europe. So it wasn't really the end of things, because if you came to Hull, the next stop's Hamburg, or Lubeck, or Copenhagen, or somewhere in Sweden, or Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia. Kind of sounds like I'm talking about the Eurovision. But, that's what this city does. This city looks out towards Northern Europe.
No, yeah, absolutely. It wasn't the end of the city that we know it. It was very much the start of an adventure.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Amazing. So we talked about Henry VIII commissioned this blockhouse.
Yeah. No, so like Henry's like lots of things are happening around about the time that this blockhouse is commissioned. Henry, he's a big egoist. He's somebody who certainly knows his mind and has a cadre of supporters who are influencing him as well. People within sort of the cardinalship, or like Thomas More or Thomas Cromwell, and as a collective, they've started to set up this kind of almost imperialistic lineage, which means that like they're starting to think, well, we can do whatever we want. One of the big things is the fact that Henry, wanted to divorce his first wife. Now, do you think he marries Catherine of Aragon? Catherine of Aragon's his big brother's wife. His big brother dies a few years before he gets crowned. And he's only an 18-year-old. Imagine being 18 years old and you become the ruler of England. You're a young man, you're a teenager. We know what teenagers are like. And through all this, you've got people screaming in the background, and he ends up marrying his dead brother's wife, Catherine, to kind of create a male heir. But out of this, as he gets older and as Catherine gets older, he comes to realise that Catherine's not going to give him the male heir that he wants. By this time, he's fallen in love with Anne Boleyn. Dun, dun, dun. Another woman walks into his life and steals his heart. But he's a Catholic. How does he go to deal with this? He wants to divorce Catherine and marry Anne. And so there's a fine dance with the Pope, the head of the Roman Catholic Church. And in the end, basically, the Pope says nope. And Henry then basically almost like throws his toys out the pram about this. He wants his own way. Oh. How can somebody hundreds of miles away question what he wants to do?
Absolutely. And let's be honest, he's a spoiled child at this point. He's been raised the prince. No one's ever said no to him at all throughout history. And now the Pope's like, that one little thing you want to do, you can't do. And he's like, well, this is it. I'm gonna kick off big style.
Yeah, because like if the Pope says no to that, it actually starts to deal with what the Pope's predecessor had put in place. So it starts to question the legitimacy of the papacy. Now, they can't be doing that. So what do? Well, why not start your own church? The Church of England. You basically take the construction of what was the Roman Catholic Church in England and move it off so that you are not just the king, but you're the head of the church as well. You're basically conflating both royalty and religious power together in one person.
Which was a bold move because he was quite in with the Catholic Pope and stuff beforehand, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was.
Before becoming king, there was a chance that he was going to go into the church.
But what would you do for love?
Wow.
And like to quote Meatloaf, I would do anything else for love. I think
including creating divorce, beheading,
and setting up your own new church.
Yeah, that's if anything, Meatloaf is an amateur compared to create a new church.
Create a new church for love. I mean, that is going some, really, isn't it? I mean, you're really pushing the boat out with that one.
And I found out like he was a bit of a sly dog as well, because not only did he discover this new love, he was sending her essentially drunk texts late night saying, "You up, babe?" Just sending a romantic letter.
Yeah. He'd totally fallen for Anne Boleyn. And to be fair, Anne had orchestrated her position. She was seen, she was in his eye line, she had supporters. So, they had been playing a very, I was going to call it delicate game of chess, but it's more like bludgeoning drafts. And, so she knew what she was doing. And of course, out of this comes this whole fallout where, Henry falls out with the French because Catherine of Aragon, she's French royalty. So if you divorce her, you're going to upset the French, you're going to upset the papacy. Then the big thing is all your population is Catholic. So you're going to upset your serfs, your peasants, everybody else that supports the Catholic Church. It's a big ask to make. And, you've got the elite making all these decisions.
It'd be like, I don't know, some idiot in power now saying, hey, maybe we should leave a European Union.
Oh, the parallels are amazing because if we take the Pilgrimage of Grace. So this is a big uprising that happens in Lincolnshire and in East Yorkshire in 1536.
Yeah.
You know, basically, it's this Catholic population saying, no, we've had enough of this. We've had enough of the dissolution of the monasteries. We've had enough of the way that our elite are taking us. You know, we're Catholics. You know, the whole of Western Europe's Catholics. We're upset with this. But in line with that, the previous year, they've seen prices go up amazingly, drastically high. Now, you know, the price of wheat and crops have risen quite drastically the year before. So they're worried about taxation. They're worried about cost of living. Does it sound familiar?
It's echoing in my mind.
Yeah. So what do you get? You've got the local population worrying about taxation, worrying about cost of living, worrying about where their elite is taking them because they don't really support it. They've not really got the stomach for it. And this leads to a massive uprising. Now, I'm not saying that, like, yes, let's get the pitchforks, let's go on uprising. But how many strikes are we seeing at the moment? Like, you know, I can understand those strikes. People are uprising. Yeah.
Yeah, the posters and the trainers are on strike.
Yeah, no.
I think. Well, this is why the blockhouse was developed originally, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, you know, the big thing then is Henry's paranoia and fears. There's nothing like a paranoid leader, is there? So Henry's worried about any kind of strife with continental Europe, any kind of strife with the local population, this strong northern-willed rebellious people that you've talked about, Jed. He's worried about them. So he's made a lot of cash out of dissolving the church. So he uses some of that to build what is a South Blockhouse, a central castle, and a North Blockhouse, all connected with a great big wall to defend the east side of the River Hull. But what's amazingly interesting about it is that when you look at the cannon positions in this South Blockhouse, some of them look out to the estuary. You can understand that. You know, you want to protect the estuary. Some of them look out towards the landscape. You know, you want to keep those people at bay. But some of the cannons point back at the city.
Right.
And the big thing's basically saying, as a deterrent, you try to take this city, I can bombard you from here. I can lay waste to the wharf along the other side of the city if I want to, if anybody should try to take it. How do you feel? What does your common person think about that?
That's I mean, Boris has done a lot wrong, but he's not holding a cannon to the city. Or, you know what I mean? That's a bold, confident move.
Yeah, I mean, maybe taxation or some other economic decision-making process is a bit like holding a cannon to people.
So,
but you've got a huge military installation set up on this side to basically. It's not about defending the city as such. It's about making sure that the portage, that important strategical and tactical and economic front, where boats can come in and dock and restock and take goods and services away and bring in armaments and stuff like that, it can be controlled. It's all about controlling it.
Yeah, it's not about the people, it's about the power.
Yeah.
And it's a grasp of power. That is a bold move.
It is a totally bold move. And it comes as part of this bigger kind of bold move of the Defence of Britain project. And so it always comes back to, or Defence of England. So it is a divorce in some ways from continental Europe. It takes England on a course that is quite different to what we see in a number of countries in continental Europe, very different to the way that the papacy take things as well. What does it sound like that's happened to you within the UK over the last decade?
It definitely reflects and mirrors that. I mean, history often, you know, they do say, unless you watch the History Channel on +1, history will always repeat itself. So I think that's happening again.
Yeah, I love the idea that, say, Boris is like sitting at home and he's flicking through the channels, and he go like, up comes the History Channel, and he's like, nah, I don't watch that. Like, I'll move on. Like, you know,
I couldn't possibly learn anything from this.
Yeah. So like, keeps on drifting between channels, and it ends up on some kind of Love Island program.
Yeah.
Thinking, oh yeah, Love Island's the way to go, rather than sitting watching and learning about mistakes of people in the past.
Well, I mean, perfect for him. He's probably not even at his own house. He's at whatever mistress's house he's got now. I mean, if you look at the parallels even in the personal lives, multiple wives, many. Because I always, from what I learnt in school, Henry VIII obviously had 5 wives?
Six.
Six wives. That's more than I learnt, see? That's the whole education for you. too worried about cannons.
You need that +1.
Yeah, I did +1. That's why I missed the first half an hour. 6 wives, and he's all we kind of learned in primary school, at least when studying this, was Henry VIII, these wives, beheaded some, divorced the others, created the church, but it was all about creating a male heir. But then I realised he also had bastards all over as well, but they didn't have a legitimate claim to the throne.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair on Henry, he's not the only king who does that.
No, absolutely not.
And that seeding elsewhere is something that you see time and time again across history. So I don't want to castigate him for that kind of thing, because he's really just pulling on the same lineage that I'm quite literally pulling on the same sort of thing that people have been doing for a long time, because he's the king.
And they are still doing Mr. Boris and your illegitimate children.
He's the king. He's like, who's going to stop him? You just said earlier on, nobody says no to him.
Yeah, exactly. He is the king.
How do you say no to somebody who represents the head of your royalty, so basically the head of government and the head of the church?
Especially when he's going around beheading people.
Yeah. Well, the minute that happens, there's a brilliant story where he tries to show that he's a balanced person. As he's moving his Reformation on, and he's trying to show that he's balancing out his will and trying to show this to continental Europe, where on the same day he beheads 3 sort of evangelists on the Protestant side of things, and beheads 3 Catholics who will not renounce their faith. He's basically said, well, I'm keeping a balance here.
Yeah, that's... Or you could just do none. That's
you could put it out there, and like, rather than beheading both sets, like, just not do them.
Yeah. He's such... The more I've kind of like read up on little things, and I often felt he's such a weird man, is Henry, as well, in his behaviours. He was like a renowned musician and singer. He brought dressage to the UK, but then at the same time, he was tyrannical. He sorted out that London has drinking water.
Yeah.
Or at least so one of his captains did.
Yeah.
But I often find stories start with, we did this wonderful thing before he beheaded the person that he sort of set out to do it.
I know, it's unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, he's a lute player. He writes poetry. So when Henry VII dies, a couple of days later, he writes a poem in his modelling teenager state. It's a bit like saying, well, if Morrissey was the Henry VIII of his time, writing all these kind of modelling tracks early on in his career, where it could have taken him just to be in a totally different world, and maybe that's why certain artists become more conservative as they progress through time. Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? He's a complex fella.
Yeah.
With a complex life, with a huge ego. His ego is massive, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. One of the weirdest things I found out, and I mean, I'll be honest, some of the sources on my internet aren't great, so you may know about this, or I might surprise you. He was Batman for a bit.
He was Batman for a bit.
Right? He used to wear a mask and go around with a mace and attack criminals.
No, I did not know that. Did he actually go, I'm Batman?
I don't think he said I'm Batman, but he would do that, and then he'd get arrested, and then he'd just be like, I'm the king, and then the people would be like, no, you're not. The king wouldn't do this. And then his people would have to come to the prison and be like, you've got the king.
Oh, imagine how you feel if you arrested the king.
Yeah.
Or is that if you arrested Elvis? Yeah, you would feel you'd feel worried. You've got to wake up the next morning wondering whether your head is still on your shoulders.
Yeah. But how tyrannical is that of a position of power? It's like, I'm just going to go around and beat people up.
Well, he kind of does that anyway, from the point of view, of the ways he takes things, He beats up the clergy and beats them into submission. He beats up his relationship with France, and he has an interesting relationship with the Holy Roman Empire in Spain, which is like an on-off again relationship. But he beats up people. And then, of course, there's the Scots. Let's face it, we are always causing trouble. And he has this, shall we, shan't we, I'm going to try and beat you up. I'm really going to muck it up on this level. War with the Scots as well. And he just, that's a brilliant little insight, that idea of beating up, a person, but he, at that higher level, is trying to beat up other countries.
Yeah.
He does, in some ways, you'd certainly say that what he does is he grows England diplomatically to punch above its weight.
Yeah.
He drives that along with his advisors. He's got a lot of clever people working with him. So he does kind of bring that up. He brings in what becomes like the navy, or he starts to modernize it. So he beats up on, from individuals to nations. For him it's all fair game.
Yeah, he's fearless in the sense of he doesn't scare, or it doesn't matter who he provokes.
Yeah, and again, it comes because of that imperial idea. He is king because God has set him in that path.
Yeah.
So, if you're at the top and you believe that, the past is a weird place, let's face it.
Yeah.
And that's not just the 1970s. That's like the 1570s or the 1540s. It's a weird place. And, if you fully believe that God, you've been born because God made sure that you were born king, then you have that full faith that your kingship is being delivered by God, so nobody can question that. But you've got this royal lineage as well, so nobody should question that. So if you've got all that indoctrinated into you, that's your way of looking at the world, then, how do you stop it?
And his path to being king isn't exactly the most straightforward paths, I believe.
No, well, he was lucky in the fact that his older brother died a few years before his father died. So he was second in line.
His father, I don't know if this is right, so we might need to edit this out. From my knowledge, his dad was in the revolution to overthrow the last king, and then they elected him king.
Yeah, so what you have is the big sort of Richard III Henry battles that ends up with the Tudor lineage. Now, I would love to find another king in the car park, but Leicester have already beaten us to that. It's funny because the site that we're digging was a car park. Coaches were parking here, and people were parking their cars here, and didn't realise what they're parking above. But the minute you say, well, we're digging in a car park, they go, well, be careful. You know what happens when you start to dig up car parks? And it's just like, well, Richard III's already been found.
Yeah.
We're not going to find either Henry, because we know they're not buried here. And so, you just think, it's a bit of a, we've got a great site, but, there's no kings under our car park.
Yeah. I think that's what's missing from history. Enough kings scattered around the country to really boost the tourism to the South Blockhouse.
Yeah, exactly. But to be fair, it's a site that is used for 350 years. It's a defensive structure. It plays an important role during the English Civil Wars. It continues to be used through the 18th and the 19th century. You've got people worried about things like the Jacobite Rebellion of 1745 against the Scots, Bonnie Prince Charlie and all that, who in their march to London get as far as Derby. Derby's a good bit south of Hull, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so, you've got all that. Yeah, then you've got the wars with the Netherlands. You've got the wars with Napoleonic France. So this site and what happens here, the citadel that gets built from the late 17th century, it maintains its importance, its strategic importance, right through until the middle of the reign of Queen Victoria.
That's amazing. And this area alone, if you think of we've got Fort Paul, stuff like that. This whole area has become such. You don't think of it as such a strategic point in English history, but this area alone, if you look around the city, it shows that we were such we were the second most strong city outside London, because they knew how important this place was. So for him to, I think Henry must have been at least one of the strong, not the start of it, but definitely was the first one that saw it as a strategic standpoint, enough to build a blockhouse and a castle.
Yeah, him and his advisors, they understand that this estuary that we sit on the edge of is really important, but it also represents a bit of a weak underbelly. Estuaries generally do, so you've got to protect them. And if you control this estuary, you can control, or certainly keep an eye on any boats that are going up onto the River Ouse, up to York, down the River Trent, back down into the Midlands towards Nottingham and Derby, those big economic centres, then out towards West Yorkshire as well. If you can control this, the hinterland around it, you can keep an eye on that. And it's not, this is in some ways, this is where the south kind of that's seeded into the Midlands becomes the north. It's not called Northumberland for nothing. Yeah. It's north of the Humber. This is where the north really starts. Yeah. And there's always, central power always wants to keep an eye on the north. Yeah. And, he knows that.
If Game of Thrones has taught me one thing, keeping the north happy is very important.
Yeah, keeping the north happy, making sure you've got a few walls.
Yeah.
And keeping an eye on the people who are behind the wall. Yeah. That could be from a Roman point of view in Hadrian's, or even possibly, think of the big wall here, or think of the wall that was around the city. Medieval cities have got these walls around them. You're always a bit worried about the other person on the other side of the wall.
It's hard to think of a hall with just like a wall around it, but
yeah, you would have had that. You walk that course of the Queen's Gardens and around the docks. Out towards the estuary, you're following that old line in the city wall, and then on this side you've got that big wall. So that Game of Thrones, that whole Game of Thrones world is so heavily influenced by what is happening in, say, medieval Britain and medieval continental Europe. What king's doing, what other king in, who's married to, who's divorcing who's chopping who's dead off. Let's hope none of them have a red wedding. It's not going to be a pretty sight. But it's like there's a lot of that in there. There's a good bit of kind of
I'm really looking forward to sort of breaking this down and going into it more in future podcasts because it's just fascinating. Just the history of this blockhouse itself. I mean, I don't even mean in the historic house. Like you said, it's we're for those that are aware, we're essentially 50 yards away from the deep.
Yeah.
We are. I've known coaches to park here. I would have no idea this was here. And so how was it found?
Well, luckily, because it continues in use right through to the middle of the reign of Queen Victoria, there are maps and plans that show it that it's here. And there are actually some really lovely drawings and other things. So thank the heavens for those map makers of the late 19th century and that mapped it. So we knew it was here, although we didn't know its exact location until a few trenches get excavated, the first ones back in the 1990s, to be able to locate it. But the thing that we're finding is just how well built it was. It's amazing. Henry threw a lot of cash at this thing. Millions in the equivalent, monetary terms. Because he made so much money about dissolving the churches. But you look at it and you just think, wow, it's stunning. It would have been a stunning building. It would have been really, really impressive.
That is something I also found out about Henry, that he dissolved a lot of the churches and stuff. And he had essentially looked after his own financial interest quite a lot. His money was very much on the rise. It was very...
Yeah, it was. I chuckle because, he brings this distribution of the lesser monasteries in first, and so, he can, sell land off. And he does sell land off. He claims the land and sells it off, makes money out of that. All the gold plate and silver plate and other things that are within these places, he takes that and he can melt it down. He can sell all that off. And he's doing other financial things. So he's got a lot of money. What do you do when you've got a lot of cash and it's burning a massive hole in your pocket? Well, why not start some wars? Yeah. And that's basically what he does. Because he's in the end, his late in his reign, his attacks on France and his war with France and taking of parts of northern France, they cost a lot of cash. And it'd be a bit like somebody thinking, I've got £1,000 now. I really want that PlayStation 5. I'm just going to go, no, you know what? I want more than one PlayStation 5. I want one downstairs and one upstairs. I'm just going to buy two. Right. And then before you know it, you've got no cash left. And that's what Henry's like. He's loaded. He's made all this money and then burns it. Right. Burns it like a child. Burns it on just and in some ways, big money pits of wars in France or and set in some wars with Scotland, and at the same time, making sure that Wales gets brought into his overall kingdom outlook and making sure that Ireland is also. So he's having to buy people, he's throwing out the largesse. I think when he visits Hull here and twice, and he loves Hull so much, in 1541 he visits twice. And so, in the autumn of 1541, when it gets pointed out that this side of the river, is the east side where we're sitting now, needs this defensive structure, he's got the cash. He's like, yeah, all right then. I'll pay for this. Yeah, we can get this done. I think it's over £20,000, £22,000, and that in 1540s, that's a lot of cash. He's got other things.
That's equivalent to what your heating bill will be this winter. So that's a crazy amount of cash.
That is. Just imagine.
Yeah, that's having big light on all the way through the night. That's some serious cash.
That's basically using your toaster.
Yeah,
cook everything.
That's longer than a 10-minute warm shower. That's
like, whoa! I'm going to throw caution to the wind. I'm not going to run a shot. I'm going to have a bath.
That's madman money.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems reasonable now, but give it a couple of years. Baths are going to be history.
Yeah.
It's going to be like the good old days. You invite everyone round for a bath.
Or that river out there is going to be busy with people bathing in it come winter, summer, high tide, low tide.
I think it's the one river where you get dirtier bathing in it than you would not bathing in it. You're like, I'll wash in a bit, it's all right. So yeah, he does he visit Hull often then, Henry?
I don't know if he rocks on up this way before 1541. But I certainly know that he visits it twice.
And it's not like it's a 6-hour drive, and it's a couple of days travel.
Oh yeah. It's not like it's an easy place to get to in certain ways. Although, it's funny. We think about drives. You say drive, but most likely, if you're going to come here, you're going to come by boat. It's going to be quicker.
Obviously,
it's going to be in some ways safer. And whether he did that or not, but this comes back to its importance. A lot of stuff's coming here by boat. Over land, things are slow, sluggish. But once you get on up the east coast, you can be quick, you can be swift. But yeah, he comes here. The Delapoles, the wealthy merchants within the city, they put him up in Suffolk Palace, which, funnily enough, is not actually far from where the Guildhall now stands now.
Right, okay.
So the seat of power now within the city was the seat of power back then, 500 years ago.
Money never changes.
Yeah, money never changes. It kind of sticks to the land.
Yeah.
It's really interesting the way that, like, a really good bit of land, money will just stick to it and people will occupy it and the power will just get passed on, baton to baton. Anyway, Henry's here. It gets pointed out to him that we need to defend the city better. And he's got the cash to burn. So he does it. He buys, from what we can see in the archaeology, the best brickmakers, the best bricklayers. When you look at the quality of the bricks, and this is where archaeology gets really nerdy. When I start saying things like,
"Come on, man, let me up. Let's get in this."
Look at the quality of those bricks.
Right.
Yeah, there's not a sentence there that you're going to hear very often, is there? Look at the quality of those bricks. Outside of bricklayers, it's only really going to be archaeologists that are going to be talking about this kind of thing. Anyway, the quality of those bricks is astounding. They're beautiful. They're really well made. They're really well laid. The bonding is fantastic. It's always crisp, really neat. You can just tell that he's bought the best people to build it.
I was looking in the blockhouse in the pit that you have here, and I was going, them bricks look a bit modern. Do you know what I mean? Like, I was like, they're quite fancy bricks. I know nothing about bricks, but I was looking at them going,
well, that could be that when you're looking in the site, you've got hundreds of years worth of different bricks.
Right.
Because the site, although it's built in the 1540s, it continues in use. So people change it and adapt it and different. What's amazing is that as time goes on, the bricks get worse and the quality of bricklaying gets worse as well. And that could just be, it all comes down to cash. So Henry's buying the best.
He put the solid foundations down.
Yeah, he certainly did. And as things change over time, the bricks get shabbier in some place. The build and the foundations get a little bit, dodgy in places. We have seen some things where you just think, is that supposed to hold the wall up? Doesn't look like it. And then by the early 19th century, when the whole thing is reconstructed, because it becomes an armory, the brick surface, it looks quite nice. But actually, when you start to investigate it and you look at the Tudor bricks, you think, it's functional. It's like it's put in to be functional as an armory, as a store, but you don't have to worry about like moving cannons around on
cracks.
it. Yeah. Well, I mean, in many ways, the big story, any story we have always comes back to water. And one of the problems they have with the blockhouse is water. So they build up the layers within the building to take it out of the floodplain, because it's always got water ingress. There's water coming up through the floor. There's water coming over the tops of the flood defences. It's a watery place.
Yeah, I also think I feel sorry for anyone who worked at the blockhouse 400 years ago. Because if they worked there now, on their lunch break, they could pop to the deep and see some penguins, and that'd make it a lot better.
I mean, yeah, well, I mean, if it was here now, over at the Deep or up on Humber Street, get some of the best croissants in town.
There you go.
You get some brilliant sandwiches and things like that. Or you could go over to Trinity Market and you go be able to pick yourself up a gyros.
There you go.
Brilliant. But back here, nearly 500 years ago, it's really going to be all about the pulses and maybe a bit of rabbit or a bit of beef.
Well, I said this because I was like, we should originally call the podcast the Blockhouse in Chip Spice. And then you went, there wasn't potatoes, and that alone blew my mind.
Yeah, exactly. Potatoes are a New World food. So, until the discovery of the rediscovery of the New World, the Americas in 1492, and then people repeated visits there. And picking up on this vegetable, this root, that's our potatoes in South America, you've got, for that, over here, you've got no potatoes, you've got no tomatoes, you've got no peppers. Imagine just removing all that from your diet. No chocolate.
I think that is
no
most
tobacco.
of my diet. I mean, I'm just going to say it. It sounds like back in the day, old El Paso fajitas were pretty rubbish.
I think there probably would have been turnip, cabbage, and more turnip, with probably a side serving of cabbage, maybe carrots, if you're lucky. Some pulses, sort of beans and things like that. Your pottage, maybe a little bit of beef, maybe a little bit of rabbit. Oysters. They were eating oysters like nobody's business here, because oysters were really cheap. They were basically a poor person's food. So we've got a lot of evidence of oysters. A bit of rabbit as well. And then the other big thing is a lot of puff. There's a lot of smoking going on. We've got a lot of clay pipes from the site.
Really?
Yeah. Bored soldiers, what are they going to do? Have a smoke.
Because, I mean, how busy day to day would the blockhouse be? Like, I guess you just garden.
Yeah, you're right. You're entirely right. Henry would claim that it works as a deterrent because it's never attacked.
Right.
It's never used in a defensive structure. It never has to fire cannon out at boats coming up.
I'm pretty sure that's what Boris said when they were nuclear weapons. It's a deterrent.
It's a deterrent. Yeah. If they've got intercontinental ballistic missiles, we need to have ICBMs because they're a deterrent. You could always have it as a catchphrase. It's a deterrent.
Yeah.
It's a deterrent. That's what you'd claim. But there's a more complicated kind of picture of things going on. But as a deterrent, it sits here, sort of glowering over at the city, glowering at the estuary and the surrounding countryside. But it's got a military garrison here, but they never have to fire a cannon in anger. They do it on religious or ritual times, like the crowning of. The last one was the crowning of the Prince of Wales in the mid-19th century. But what do? You clean the guns, you do your things, you repeat the same thing. If it was clean today, you clean it tomorrow, you clean it the next day, you keep all that clean and going. But boy, what else are you going to do? You might only have 4, 5, 6 people sitting in the blockhouse. It's quite a big building, but you don't have to have many. Cleaning it out, making sure everything's ship-shape.
So how many men would have manned?
I think a handful. Without it being at, say, high alert, you wouldn't have to have a big stand of soldiers sitting in the South Blockhouse. A bigger stand of soldiers sitting in the castle building. But the blockhouse, you wouldn't need many just to keep it going. So we've got a part of the site where it looks like that would have been the place where the fires are set, where the room's kept warm, where they're eating and things like that, probably close to the entranceway. Whereas the bits where the castle, where the cannons are almost unoccupied, unless they need it.
Imagine I've got blockhouse duty tonight.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Be cold as well, wouldn't it?
It's freezing.
Yeah.
It'd be like basement style. It's dark, it's dingy, it's wet, it's cold. It might feel kind of pleasant if it's 37 degrees outside.
Oh, yeah, it's summertime, daytime in June getting on it.
But in the middle of winter.
Jake, why are you guarding your shirt off and just top it up on a tan?
Yeah, exactly. just soaking in the rays. But most of the year, and you've got the wind whipping off the estuary, you've got that rain being driven against the side of the building. It's not exactly going to be Butlins.
Right. And I can't believe they spent all this money on it and it was just never used.
It's a deterrent. That's what you would say. But, in some ways, the parliamentarians during the English Civil War, they beat Charles I to the punch with Hull, and that rebellious Hull nature, and they take the military garrison here, they take the city because it's a deterrent, and it's like they know that they hold the armoury here because this is the armoury for the north of England. It's a really important place. If you can control this, always comes back down to control Hull. You can control so much.
That's why I think the things haven't kicked off with the Scottish. We haven't gone to war recently because you're like the Scottish are there going, yeah, we could probably do in Middlesbrough. Yeah, we could definitely take Newcastle. What's after that? York, easy. What's that? Hull. Ooh. Yeah, we'll just take them off. We'll just keep them. off.
That's really funny, Jen, because I only moved here to Hull about a year and a half ago,
right.
And I'm surprised how many Scots people there are in Hull.
Yeah.
Within the little company that I work for, part of Hull City Council, there's three of us. My line manager's Scottish. Where I live in West Hull, I can walk down the road, and at the weekends they stock the Scottish newspapers. I just sort of bump into my wife bumps into people who are Scottish or who have moved here, and there seems to be a kinship. I have to say there does seem to be some connection between the Scots and the people at Hull.
I just got back from Edinburgh, and if you're not aware of Edinburgh, it's the biggest arts festival in the world. As a stand-up comedian, it's where comedians go up to see some of the best in the world and hopefully get seen on television or by agents. And this year, I went up there to watch some of them, so it was a great time.
Yeah.
But what happened is, if you've ever been to Edinburgh, it's very much the England of the Scotland. But on the rare occasion I did get to talk to a Scottishman, they were like, everyone knows Hull. In Scotland, I don't know what it is, but they're like, my cousin's there, and you're like, why is there this weird kingship between Hull and Scotland?
I think it's a coastal, seaward-looking city,
yeah.
And a lot of Scotland is coastal and sea-looking. Glasgow and Edinburgh. You think about Edinburgh, but it's close relationship with Leith. It's a seaward-looking place, and I think that whole east coast of Britain, from Aberdeen, and if you're a fisherman following certain seasonal fishing routes and things like that, Aberdeen down to Leith, then down to Newcastle, down past Scarborough, and then down to Hull. It's all part of that kind of seaward facing east coast of Britain, and I think that's why there's a kinship there. It's just the way that folk on the east side of the UK look out to the sea, look out to the North Sea. I'd say you find similarities on the west coast as well, sort of Glasgow and Liverpool and places like that. But there's certainly a kinship. Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. All right, we'll finish by just talking about Henry. So we'll talk, we've talked about how he kind of came into the ring. So he started all these wars. Was he successful at war?
Not really. In some ways, as a summary, not really. It's C+ could try harder.
Yeah.
He does waste a lot of money in wars with France.
Right.
He does manage to get a slow march towards what becomes the Union, using English setup within Wales and making sure that there's a better connection with Ireland. He's lucky that in Scotland the changes of royals sort of plays to his hand in many ways, so he's kind of lucky that way, but he manages to fumble that as well, to tell the truth. And he just wastes a lot of money. But during all that, again, he would probably claim, and you can see that there's a lot of good sort of historical analysis of it, is that he comes back, he's really raised England's profile. He's really brought the power of the nation up in many ways, because he's taken that Boolean control of both the royal lineage, the imperial kind of lineage that he sees, and that religious lineage. He does put that what's becoming this strive towards modernity.
Would you say he sort of put the foundations of the sort of rise of the empire, I guess?
He certainly set the line.
Yeah.
It has. And I think that's where the parallels between that royal period in the middle of the 16th century and anything we see going on politically now,
Right.
because obviously, we're right in the middle of another Conservative Party-led, standoff or stand down or talent show contest.
It's honestly, as a comedian, every day I'm like, I'm no point doing any topical material because it changes every hour at this moment. It's crazy. I keep saying, you look at places like Ukraine, they hired a comedian and he became the president and a world leader. Whereas we hired a world leader and we got a comedian. I don't know how we worked that out.
Well, maybe we'll end up with you, Jed.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
I'll be doffing my cap to you.
That blockhouse is getting rebuilt. I tell you that.
I'll be saying to my friends, you know that Jed, our Prime Minister Jed? Well, I knew him once. I sat with him in a cabin and and done a podcast with him.
You're a liar, Pete. I talked to him about the quality of bricks. I don't think you did.
No way. That never happened.
Well, that's brilliant, man. We'll cap it off there. We've got 4 more episodes.
Yeah, 3 or 4.
Three or 4 more episodes. Where next episode we'll go more into the history of the blockhouse, which I'm very excited for. But this was just a basic introduction to the man that created it, I guess. Good old Henry VIII. We found out more that he just married a lot and was trying for a son, which I'm very glad for.
Well, thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Sign off. We'll see you next time. Follow us on social medias, download us, and leave us a good review. Thank you.